I'm Jess.
And I'm Sarah.
And this is Beyond the Shelves. Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about books for Pride because it is Pride Month. So we've got a lot of titles to get to. So we're going to just briefly talk about what we're reading right now. And if it piques your interest, you can check it out. So I am currently listening to When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. It's kind of a backlist title for me. Always been on my radar. And then my mom finally read it and was like, yes, I love it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to read it. I didn't realize I was first in line for a copy of Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. So
really?
Immediately bumped into my inbox yesterday and I was like, yes, check mark. Yes, please. So I just started that one and I can tell I'm going to love it already. So what are you reading right now, Sarah?
So I am reading In the Lives of Puppets by the new T.J. Klune.
I'm way down on that list.
I bought it because I was not going to wait. Yeah. And then I'm audiobooking, actually a recommendation from you. I am audiobooking I Kiss Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston.
I love that book.
It's been so cute.
It's just like such a it's feel good.
Yes.
It's like a feel good book. It's probably... Yep, I'm going to say it's my favorite Casey McQuiston book.
It might be. I mean, I'm only about halfway through, but so far I'm like, oh, is this going to edge out red and white and royal blue?
Yeah.
And that's a mouthful.
Yeah, that is.
But I think it might. So that is what I am reading right now.
I don't remember if I listened or read that. They all blur together sometimes. So, yes.
Okay, so before we get started, though, we got to talk about what's coming up here at the library and outside the library. So our last Avid is coming up here on June 15th at 7 here at Central Library, and that is with Taylor Harris, her book is called This Boy We Made. And it's a book about her son and some medical issues he was going through and just all the health challenges and trying to figure out the medical world. Specifically, being a Black mom navigating the medical system, which is hard enough already, and that just adds a whole nother layer to it. So she'll be here again on June 15th. That's a Thursday at 7 p.m. And then the other event that's coming up is Capital City Pride.
Yay! It's going to be so fun this year.
So it's June 9th through 11th, and we will be in the teen zone. So come find us.
Check us out. Library in the teen zone. Well,
not us specifically.
I mean, maybe.
I'll
be like, Ash, can I join?
But the library will be there.
Yes.
So should you.
Yes. And as I mentioned, the reason, of course, that we plugged Capital City Pride and kind of like, as I mentioned earlier, that we're going to talk about Pride books, it would be remiss as librarians if we did not talk about the large amount of books that are being challenged or banned currently in the United States and in Iowa. There were 2,571 unique titles challenged in 2022, which was like, it's up from like 1,500 or so in 2021 and like 500 or so in 2019.
Yes.
So that's like a huge increase. That's like, even between 2021 and 2022, there was like almost a 40% increase. And as we know, if you're paying attention to the news at all, it's just continually going up and up and up. And the biggest thing that I think we would like people to know is that the 90% of these challenges were part of attempts to censor like large collections, like multiple titles. So like 40% were like 100 titles or more. So it wasn't like someone coming in and saying, I disagree with genderqueer being taught in this high school. It was someone saying, I disagree with all these books that portray LGBTQIA plus youth, or there's a lot of like civil rights issues, social justice issues that are also being challenged. So it's just something that we really want people to be aware about, especially as librarians. It has not really touched us necessarily here at DMPL, but it's coming. And pay attention, support your local library, check out the books, see yourself in stories, read yourself in stories. I could go on, but we should probably stop and get to the books we're going to recommend.
So that's the downer for the podcast.
That's it. The rest is all we did. I will say that Sarah and I did make a really concerted effort. Concerted? I think that's the right word.
Yeah,
sorry.
You're right.
To try to talk about books that all had really joyful themes, or at least some happy and joyful themes. So it wasn't, we were talking about happy queer lives.
Yes.
So that was something that was really important to us when we chose some of these books we're going to talk about. And we divided up into genres and ages. So we're going to, I know we generally talk about just adult books here, but we're going to go from top to bottom.
Yes, everything
We're
in
gonna
between.
Cover it all.
All of it.
So I'm going to start by talking about 2 fiction titles. The first book I want to talk about is called Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park. This is an English language debut, so it is a translation. I personally love translated books. They're some of my favorite books. If you are not a reader of translations, I could recommend about 400 more. But
Next podcast.
It's just a really unique way. It's just such an insight into the English language that I just love so much. And there's a really good footnote about the translation, or endnote about the translation in this book. So, but it's really just about a young gay man living in Korea and navigating the ups and downs of like friendships, relationships. It's just kind of like there's no like hard plot necessarily, just kind of the ups and downs of life. Flawed individuals, but still like trying to find their way in the world. Bad relationships. Like it takes place in the 2000s, I believe, which like is like makes me feel like this is like some millennial style like vibes, you know, like being like, what am I doing with my life? But I like how it just like shows all the complexities and contradictions of LGBTQIA plus life, like just from like freedom, like joyful freedom and camaraderie and being friends, to the reality of homophobia and alienation. So just in general, an absolute firework of a book. That is Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park. The second book I'm going to talk about is Rainbow Rainbow by Lydia Conklin. I am not only a translation girly, but I am a short story girly. And I'm going to preface every time I recommend a short story book, I know this goes against everything that you ever believe in, but I think it's okay to pick up a short story book and read a few stories and put it down and never read it again.
Yes.
It's totally okay, because the ability to craft an entire plot, novel, whatever you want, into like a tiny story, I mean, that's magic. And Lydia Conklin really crushes it with this one. So I couldn't resist talking about a short story collection. There's a few. We're actually going to have, I should mention, we're going to put out a public catalog list. So there'll be a list in the catalog for you to find every single one of these books, plus lots extras that we talk about. We're going to put a link in the show notes, just so you know where to find everything that we're going to talk about. I should have said that at the top, but we're just sliding it in right here.
Yeah.
But I really like this book. There's a couple other short story books that are going to be on that list because I just can't help it. Because I think it does a really good job of celebrating like this range of emotion that's not necessarily represented in queer stories, kind of like a little bit of joyfulness, self-doubt, things like that. In one of my favorite stories, it is about a 5th grader who is exploring their gender identity by dressing as an ox instead of a matriarch for their class Oregon Trail reenactment, which I just...
Can't die of dysentery if you're an ox.
It's just delightful.
Well, maybe. I don't know. I know very little about
maybe.
Oxen.
No, I don't think you can.
Yeah.
It's just like all around insightful and compassionate, and it's written without judgment, and it has a really beautiful cover that has rainbows on it. Oh. So that is Rainbow Rainbow by Lydia Conklin.
All right, so now we're going to move a little away from the millennial ennui, away from the short stories that Jess is giving you permission to not read all of, which
100%.
I completely agree with. Life's too short to read stuff you don't want to read.
Amen.
So I'm gonna talk about mysteries, which is a little bit of outside of a genre I normally read. So this was fun because I got to pick up some books. I know we were going to talk about some queer joy, and this has some joy in it, but they're mysteries, so there's also death.
When we get to my sci-fi picks, it'll be like, how can I mean, I'm sorry. It's like, I am going to tell you about a dystopian.
Yeah.
So, a dystopia. Like, it's not going to be fully happy, but...
But these are fabulous books if you love mysteries. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Dead Girls by Nekesa Afia. So this is the first in a series. It's set in the 1920s. It's about Louise, who is a black woman of the 1920s. She dances all night and waits tables all day.
Sweet. Sounds like a life.
Right? But then one morning she goes to the cafe she works at and there is a dead woman at the front door, as one does.
Classic mystery.
Classic mystery. What's interesting about the story, a couple of things. Obviously, it's set in the 1920s, so she ends up getting recruited by the cops to help solve this case because they feel like she'll have a bit of an in. And they recruit her partly because 10 years prior to when the story begins, she gets kidnapped and escapes. So I don't know why these cops think that like that will give her an in with this.
All right.
But so not only does it, the mystery obviously is the main plot line, but it talks about racism and sexism and all of that is wrapped into this story and homophobia as well. But she is a firecracker, so read it for her. She doesn't take, I can't swear on the podcast. She doesn't take from anyone.
There we go.
Yeah,
we know what you're saying.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So that's Dead Girls by Nekesa Afia. Highly recommend. The second one is called Fade Out by Joseph Hansen. And this actually got republished in 2020. It has these really awesome noir covers. But it was originally published in 1970. And what is so amazing about this is at that time when this series was getting published, 49 of 50 states had felony laws against homosexuality. So this was like a really big deal that this was getting written, that it was getting published, that people were reading it. And so this is very noir. And it stars an insurance adjuster, which I love when they star insurance adjusters because it sounds like such a boring job. But what I like is it starts out in the intro by another gay mystery writer. Michael Nava writes the intro to the series, and he talks about how the character is contentedly gay. And I feel like that's such important phrasing, very purposeful phrasing in that intro, and that he is content in who he is, which I feel like in 1970 would have been difficult when you are considered a felony at that time. So this is a great series. It's been rebranded in 2020 with these great covers. If you love the series, there's many more to come. And if you like noir mysteries, you have to pick up this book right now.
I have never heard of this. Yeah. I'm so excited. I was just talking about it, how I was like, I've never heard of this one that Sarah's going to talk about. I was so pumped. I was like, I'm going to pick it up and check it out. It sounds delightful. Noir is my mystery genre if I'm going to read it. So,
and also the author Joseph Hansen is a poet by trade prior to, and so his prose. I
love poets who write novels.
His prose is so beautiful and so spare. Yes, I can see just the hard eyes from Jess. I know. I'm so excited.
Poets who write novels are just like, they have my heart 100%.
Yay.
I will definitely be checking this out, and you should too. Okay, so I'm going to pivot into our science fiction or fantasy picks. I will try not to gush about this book because this is one of my favorite books that I have read this last year. It is called I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself by Marissa Crane. If you're a longtime podcast listener, i.e. from the first episode, I talk about how I was really captivated by the term ghost daddy when I read this book. I was like, you had me a ghost daddy. And this I knew nothing about this book, but I was like, this title, yes. I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself, 10 out of 10 alone for the title. Yeah. But I just love this book, so I'm going to try not to gush too much about it. But basically, it is a dystopia. It takes place in the not too distant future where there is no longer prison, basically. There's a Department of Balance, and they've adopted this radical new form of law enforcement. So rather than incarceration, people who do wrong things are given a second shadow. and sometimes a third and some fourth and so on, however bad you are. And the shadow is like a reminder of your crime and a warning for all the people around you that like you're a bad person. And these people are called shadesters. And they're just like disenfranchised, publicly shamed, deprived of civil rights. Like you can't grocery shop at the same time. Like, you know, it's not only that you're like publicly shamed, but like you do have less rights for sure.
Wow.
It's also, there's cameras everywhere.
Oh.
In this current state.
Constantly watched.
Yes. But yeah, so that is kind of the backstory of like the world that we're living in here. And the book is mostly about Chris. Chris is a shadester. She does have a shadow. And she is grieving her wife while trying to raise their very young daughter who was given a shadow at her birth. But like basically this is just about Chris like finding this, like figuring out how to navigate parenthood, having a shadow, finding a new family, reconnecting like with her family. And there's this there's a Kirkus in the Kirkus review, starred review, there's this quote, and I don't normally come to this podcast and quote things to you, but it just so perfectly describes this novel. Writing fiction that convincingly leans toward hope is a challenging task, but Crane does so with self-assured grace. An anthem for queer love and solidarity that rises above the dystopian cacophony.
Well, that is a really good quote.
I know. How did I like? I mean, I don't know. With the Kirkus review, I don't know if they have authors on them necessarily, but it's just like it's like this dark. It starts in this dark place and ends in this like beautiful, joyful space, and I love it so much.
That sounds amazing.
So that is I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself by Marissa Crane. The next book I'm going to talk about is definitely a Book Chat Librarian favorite. It is Light from Uncommon Stars by Rai Aoki. This book is just a true delight. Talk about joyful. This book is joyful. It has, I mean, there are struggles, but it's lovely. So the story behind this one is that it starts, we meet a transgender violinist named Katrina. She is run away from a really abusive household, and she kind of like stumbles on this mentorship of the Queen of Hell. So this like famous violinist who is going to mentor her because she made a deal with the devil.
Yes.
Love that. She made a deal with the devil that she has to deliver these souls of violinist prodigies, so she has to turn them into terrible people, and then she can be freed of her deal. You'll learn more about it if you read the book. I could go into more detail, but that's kind of the basics. So she is training Katrina to be this, helping her, giving her a place to live because she is homeless, helping her, learn to be a really talented violinist. Katrina is really into video game music, which I also love as a little aside, as to something that like subverts also the dominant cultural idea that like classical music can't be like video game music. I wish I could hear like some of the things that she plays. But and then there's a side story because there's a spaceship that
one does.
There's a spaceship that is disguised as a family-owned donut shop, and it is run by Lan Tran, who happens to be an interstellar refugee. So she's protecting her family from this crazy interstellar war. So like it's like this like their spaceship is there, but it looks like a donut shop. And so it just, as things, the plot ensues in a beautiful way. It's just like really warm and hopeful, and it's really a good way of like it shows women just trying to figure their stuff out.
We're really that word is gonna come into this podcast. Yeah.
They're just trying to figure it out, figure out their relationships, figure out their lives, figure out their choices between good and evil. What are they going to choose, And something that I really love about this book, besides the constant feeling of wanting to eat donuts, because they describe them in delicious detail. Other food as well. It's a very food-focused novel, too.
I'm in.
It is honest about some of the really horrible things that trans people have to deal with, while at the same time being, like, kind and sweet and all around delightful. So it doesn't shy away from those darker things, but it's not the focus of the book. And it's just all around a 10 out of 10 read, 5-star read for me for sure.
Ooh. And the cover is beautiful.
It's so cute.
They say don't judge a book by its cover, but we do.
Oh,
we all do.
100%.
100%. No, you had me at donuts, which was like later. You had me before then, because I feel like that was pretty late in your description.
But it's true. Like, you can't talk about. I feel like if I recommend this book in a book chat, I always say like, be prepared to crave donuts or something along the lines, like it being like, this is a compelling character-driven novel. Be prepared to crave donuts, because you will. You will.
Those sound amazing.
Yes.
Well, I feel like the fun genre as far as joy comes from, and that's romance, which it's always my genre. But today is specifically fun. I have 2 great books I'm really excited to talk about. And the first is called Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellafleur, which also, what a great author name.
Such a good author name.
Bellafleur.
I love it.
All right. Anyway, focus, Sarah. Focus. So this is a contemporary romance. It's very loosely based on Pride and Prejudice. Like, I didn't even catch it until about halfway through that the main characters are named Darcy and Elizabeth.
I didn't know that about this book.
Yes.
I know this book, but I didn't know that about this book.
Yeah. And I'm a huge Austen fan, so I was kind of like, I was like, oh, how did I make it 200 pages before I realized? But so this is a sapphic romance between these 2 women, Darcy and Elizabeth. And it's astrology meets actuarial science.
Love it.
Yes. So basically, the plot is Darcy is an actuarial scientist. So very math, very logical, very practical. And Elizabeth runs an Instagram page where her and her best friend do all things astrology. And they're partnering with a dating service to get all their astrology stuff connected with finding your true love. So obviously Darcy thinks she's full of it at the beginning. But it is becomes a fake dating romance, which is one of my favorite tropes. And there's just great banter. I love anything that's got good banter. And it's got some medium spice. So definitely some spice in there, but nothing too crazy. But it's just a delightful read. It just made me so happy. I actually listened to this one. I audiobooked this one. And they were just so delightful.
This has been on my TBR for
Yes.
quite a while. I just haven't. I can see the cover. I just haven't picked it up.
Yeah.
But you might have pushed it over the edge for me here.
Good.
I've got 2 now.
Yes.
I've got 2.
I think this is the best I've ever done with Jess. We have such different reading tastes. She's like, no, not for me. Which is great. I love that we have different reading tastes because I do the same. So the second one on my list is It Takes Two to Tumble by Cat Sebastian. I love a historical romance with a great punny title. So this is a historical romance. It's kind of a grumpy sunshine romance, which is another one of my favorite tropes, which is why it made the list. But you have this stern father who's also it's not the Navy then, but whatever. He's off on a ship somewhere. And so this lovely pastor in the town decides or kind of gets conned into taking care of his kids. So, of course, the kids already love this pastor when the father comes back. And so he's all stern and doesn't understand why his kids love this guy. And so, of course, it's like the kids who bring them together. It's very Parent Trappy.
Aww.
Oh, and I'm here for it. So I'm really in it for the kids. Actually, the main 2 characters are great, which I'm Ben and Philip, and I'm not sure which one goes with which character.
That's okay.
But Ben and Philip fall in love. And anyway, so just a happy ever after, some grumpy sunshine. Oh, I love grumpy sunshine.
I like grumpy sunshine too, which is the trope where you have a stern character,
Yes.
someone who's gruff and doesn't necessarily have to be the male character, by the way, just to be clear, but a stern, rough character, and then a delightful ray of sunshine, and then they somehow get together. I like grumpy sunshine too.
And actually, Written in the Stars is a little grumpy sunshine too, which is pretty pretty standard for a Pride and Prejudice retelling.
Yeah, I feel like I can see the cover of It Takes Two to Tumble, and it's a delight also. If I recall.
Yes. And it's actually like a two like model, like the actual two people on the cover compared to the like digital drawing covers. Yes.
I think that's why I like it so much. I think I remember being like, I've never seen anything like this before with two men on the cover of a romance novel. When I first saw it, so I thought that was great. So
yes, it's lovely. Ooh, and then I get to go with my next genre, which is nonfiction, which is a genre and is just a place where we put things that are true.
Place where we put things that are true.
I give the best definitions.
I'm gonna make a t-shirt that says nonfiction, the place where we put things that are true.
Please do.
That's gonna be podcast merch. We're gonna do it. The library has merch. Why can't the podcast have merch?
We'll wear it on the podcast and you'll never know. So anyway, I got a couple of nonfiction books which I loved. The first one is called When We Rise by Cleve Jones. This is such a good it's a little bit memoir. It's a little bit history of the movement. Cleve Jones is an activist. He worked under Harvey Milk at the time. And he was part of the gay liberation movement in San Francisco during the 70s. He's still an activist now. But it's just kind of his story. And so it starts with him moving to San Francisco and trying to find out who he is and what he wants to be, not just with his sexuality, but with his career, with his life, what's next. And it's just so fascinating to watch him just grow as an individual and then meet these and befriend all these people in the gay liberation movement, some of which I did not know. So I'm madly Googling things as well as he's just like dropping names in this memoir. But it was just such an eye-opening novel for me. He also is the original creator. I mean, he didn't physically create it, but the idea for the AIDS memorial quilt was actually Cleve Jones. And it's really funny listening to him talk about the quilt in particular because he would tell his friends about it, like, this needs to happen. We're losing all these friends and family members to AIDS. And they're just like, that's dumb. I don't want to make a quilt. And it's just so
Joke's on you.
Yes, right? Just to see, knowing about it from a historical standpoint, it's so funny to me to hear him talk about that he was like, nobody wanted to do this with me. And it's such an iconic part of making AIDS known to people and the devastation of AIDS known to people, especially at that time. So it's both funny and I said, like we said, we were gonna do joy here today. And I think even though it touches on all these really hard, difficult topics, he brings joy to every part of this memoir. So highly recommend. And that was When We Rise by Cleve Jones. And the other one is Here For It by R. Eric Thomas. This is also a set of essays. So again, feel free to skip where you want to skip with these essays. But he is so funny. And this is another man. He writes for Elle, or did at the time that he was writing this book. And he has these heartfelt, funny memoirs about growing up and figuring out who he is and what he wants to be. So a little bit Cleve Jones similarities there. But it centers around this idea of why bother, which I found really interesting and I think anyone can relate to. Why bother caring about X, Y, or Z when I might not be around to see it, when it might not make anything better, when it might not change anything. And again, that sounds really sad, but he brings so much joy and heart to these essays as far as telling you why you should bother.
Yeah, I think it's a great question to answer in a good way.
Yes.
Why bother is something that, I mean, everyone feels that way.
Yeah. And it's maybe overcoming that. Maybe not always overcoming that, but in overcoming that to find the joy of what's next.
Yeah, and I feel like especially, in communities that are traditionally marginalized, it's even more like how can we fight against this, or how can we push back against hate, homophobia, all those things. What's the point? Because it's just going to keep happening. So I love the idea of a book that says why you should bother.
Yes.
But also ask the question too.
Yeah, and celebrates that. And
Yeah.
that's an okay question
To ask.
Yes. So those are my 2 topics for nonfiction.
I did forget. I'm going to quickly plug another nonfiction book because it is what I'm also currently reading that I forgot to talk about at the top of the podcast. But the icon and the legend, Samantha Irby, wrote a new book. It just came out Tuesday. It is called Quietly Hostile. I cannot recommend her books enough. They are belly laugh hilarious. They are great. So
Yes.
I have to, it's essays too. You feel free to choose whatever you want to read from them, but I fully recommend reading that one and pretty much anything that Sam Irby writes. She is hilarious. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. So I'm going to talk about young adult books. Not necessarily a genre, but a place where we put young adult books.
We're very good at our jobs, guys.
Totes. This was so fun, and honestly it was kind of hard because there are so many good books out there for teens, and I love that there's all this availability for especially younger kids to see themselves in these stories. And so I had to narrow it down. The first one I'm going to talk about is called Beating Heart Baby, and it is by Leo Min. And this book is just so cute. Such a cute book. It is a love story of Santi and Sua. Santi moves to LA from Florida after kind of like a traumatic breakup with an online friend. Needs to just kind of move forward from that bad blood. So he moves for a fresh start, and he is in marching band. So he arrives at the marching band camp where he's welcomed by everyone except Sua.
Of course.
Little enemies to lovers. Enemies to lovers, friends to lovers kind of vibe is going to happen here. Sua's like suspicious, but like kind of interested in this new kid, Santi. Sua's a Korean and Japanese and is a singer-songwriter whose family does not approve of his transition or his like dreams to be a rock star. So this romance unfolds between them. I love that the first half of this book is told from Santi's point of view and the second half is told from Sua's, and that kind of like keeps with the music theme. It's like a side A and a side B.
Yes.
And like you're able to immerse yourself into each of these boys' minds and like kind of get fuller portraits of who they are, and then that makes their love story even more delightful. It will break your heart, but it'll put it back together again. I promise. And I also really like that there is bisexual representation in this book, which is not. It's a less common representation that we see in any type of LGBTQIA plus literature. So that is Beating Heart Baby.
Question: When the book starts over, or does the book start over from the other point of view?
Jumps ahead.
Just jumps ahead.
Jumps ahead.
Okay.
A year, I believe. I think it jumps ahead.
We'll say
it goes forward. And so that's kind of a backlist title. I didn't want to talk about too many brand new books, but the next book I'm going to talk about is called Imogen, obviously by Becky Albertalli, who is a well-known young adult writer. Wrote Love, Simon, or Simon. What's the real title? Simon and the Homo Sapien Agenda.
Yes.
It's a long title, but it got rebranded into Love, Simon from the TV show. Anyways, Becky Albertalli, I will say if you have followed her career and her life on the internet, on Twitter, on anywhere, you will see why this book is probably really important to her and a really big part of her own story as well. So it is about Imogen, who is, quote, hopelessly heterosexual, unquote, and the world's best ally. And so after she's invited to spend the weekend with her best friend Lily at Lily's college, where she will go the next year, she is really excited to go like hang out with all these cool older kids, but she's also a little worried because Lily has all these amazing queer friends and Imogen has always just been the token straight friend in the group. But that gets kind of flipped on its head because Lily told everyone that she used to date Imogen.
Oh.
So they don't necessarily look as Imogen as the the token straight friend. And then the weekend goes great, and she walks away with something she never expected, which is a crush on one of Lily's super cute friends, Tessa. So it's really like, can one girl shake up her entire sexuality? I love that also. I'm sorry. I also love that in a social media graphic that they shared for the book, the author describes Imogen as having queer discourse brainworms. Which I think is just so relatable to any teens or humans who are questioning their sexuality or just they're who they are in the world. So I have full disclosure, I've not read this book yet, but it is high on my TBR, and I'm really excited to read it. I think it's going to be a great one. I mean, she doesn't. Becky Abercrombie. Oh. She doesn't. She always hits.
Yeah,
so.
No misses.
Yeah.
No misses.
So that is Imogen, obviously, by Becky Abercrombie. It's a lot of long words there. I'm going to move on and talk about middle grade books. Another place where, oh my gosh, there were so many choices. The first one I want to talk about is called Ellie Ingalls Saves Herself by Leah Johnson. Leah Johnson is a YA author. She wrote You Should See Me in a Crown.
Okay.
Great also YA book. If you have not read, I love Full of queer joy. But this one is cute too. This is delightful. Ellie Ingalls is like this like quiet girl. She doesn't like to stand out. As long as she's got like her best friend and her comic book, she's like good to go, right? So she's like stays in the background. But this freak earthquake hits her small town. You can tell it's a middle grade book. A freak earthquake hits her small town, and she wakes up with the power to bring anything back to life with just her touch, a la Pushing Daisies, yes! The greatest TV show that ever existed.
R.I.P. Pushing Daisies.
Oh gosh. So when a video of her using this power goes viral, she like suddenly gets like shoved into the spotlight and has to kind of like deal with that. Middle school is obviously hard enough, but now she has like her newfound fame. She has like paparazzi in her front yard, and she has to deal with the possibility that she might be in love with her best friend, but her best friend doesn't know it. This book is fast-paced, which I think is always good for reluctant readers. If you get a fast-paced book, it's going to keep them engaged and keep going, and super funny. Just all around like a little joyful coming-of-age story. And it's called Ellie Ingalls Saves Herself by Leah Johnson, but the cover says Ellie Ingalls Saves the World, and the world is crossed out, and it says herself, which I think is important to know also with the title. Kind of is the storyline there too. So
fun fact about Pushing Daisies, weirdly, not about the book.
Please tell me.
Did you know that Kristen Chenoweth wins an Emmy after it got canceled?
How?
Yeah. So like she wins for the season in which it gets canceled, and she goes up and talks about how she needs a job. She basically like pitches herself on the Emmy stage. Love it.
I love that show so much.
just a quick segue.
It's worth a segue. Yeah. If you, we're also going to recommend you watch Pushing Daisies. Can you check it out at the library? Good question. I believe so. Yes, you can check out the DVDs at the library. Yep. So, anyways,
back to middle grade.
The second middle grade book I'm going to talk about, I scoured my list because I really wanted to talk about a graphic novel, because graphic novels are also really great for kids. They are quote unquote real books. Reading a graphic novel is no different than reading a book. I will get on my soapbox and talk about it for days. But I'm going to talk about The Deep Dark Blue by Nikki Smith. So this is actually a fantasy graphic novel written about twins, Grayson and Hawk, who have to flee their home because there's like a political coup. So I think one of their cousins killed their parents and took over the kingdom, and so they had to run away. They assumed new identities as female twins and start living with the Communion of Blue, which is an order of magical women who spin the threads of reality to their will.
I love it.
Will I join this Communion of Blue after this podcast? Yes, I will. So as they grow and learn about themselves in their new community and their new identities, they're also trying to like plan to avenge their royal home, because like why wouldn't you?
Obviously.
Any good fantasy has an avenge plot.
Yep.
But while Hawk wants to return to his old life, Grace realizes that she wants to stay in the only place that will let her live as a girl, which is the Communion of the Blue. So it's just like a lovely little book about trans identity in a really beautiful way. And it's the colors, like it's all colored blue and pink and purple, which I just think it's such a lovely, affirming graphic novel. So that is The Deep and Dark Blue by Nikki Smith.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Mm-hmm. So I got to do the kids' books, which I was really excited about. And I also reached out to some of our youth librarians because I wanted to know what their favorite books were. I did a lot of crying reading. Of all of the genres I am talking about, the kids' books are the ones that made me tear up the most, in good ways, though, in joyful ways. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called Kapemehu by Hanele Moana Wangkalu, Dean Hamer, Joe Wilson, and then it's illustrated by Daniel Sosa. I actually read this as an ebook, which I've never read a children's novel or a children's picture book as an ebook. So that was a lot of fun and able to do like at my desk, which was also fun. But this is about a story that's actually a 15th century indigenous Hawaiian legend. So it's based on that, and it's about this legend that 4 Tahitian mehu, which are dual male and female spirits, imbue stones with healing power. So they come from Tahiti to Hawaii, and imbue these stones with healing power to help the people of the Hawaiian Islands to survive and thrive and prosper. But then the stones are lost. These stones actually exist. And until the 1960s, I mean, they were houses were put on top of them. They were completely hidden until the 1960s. And so, but now they're saved, they're preserved to this day. But this has the most beautiful illustrations in this book. It was also turned into a short film, which was Oscar nominated. So if you don't feel like reading the small children's picture book,
the very short picture book,
you can watch the short film instead. But yeah, just absolutely beautiful. This one made me cry. And so did the next one that I'm going to talk about, which is Our Subway Baby by Peter Mercurio, and then it's illustrated by Leo Espinosa. So this one was actually recommended to me by Miss Jen over at Franklin, Miss Jennifer. And I got tons of, and you'll see this in the book list catalog that we're creating as well, but I got tons of great recommendations from all of our librarians. So I did, like I said, a lot of crying, a lot of reading, and I'm very excited for you guys to see the whole list. But Our Subway Baby is also, it's based on a true story. It's actually written by one of the dads. So one day, one of the dads goes into the subway, like a regular subway day in New York City, and he finds a baby wrapped in a sweater. So he picks it up, calls the correct authorities. They come and take the kid, but he just can't stop thinking about this child. And oh my gosh, I'm crying, like I'm tearing up just thinking about it. But him and his husband decide at first, like, maybe we should foster, what should we do? And the judge is actually the one that was like, do you want a child for Christmas, essentially? And I loved the story for a number of reasons. And one was they didn't shy away from the fact that the answer wasn't yes immediately. It was like, I don't know, because this changes everything, right? But in the end, they knew it was the right decision for them, and they had this lovely family. And in the back of the book is this lovely picture of them all grown up.
I know.
Where they talk about it. So I highly recommend, pick it up right now. I just returned it because I read it like 3 times before this podcast. But yes, please. So that was Our Subway Baby by Peter Mercurio and illustrated by Leo Espinosa.
I legit remember when Jennifer told me about that book, and I was standing in the children's stacks, and I picked it up and I started reading it. Like, she's at the desk, I'm right at the picture book bins in Franklin, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I love it. It's so good. It's
so
excellent.
good.
It's an excellent bath. Okay, you guys, I know this is probably a little longer podcast than usual. We just had so many things we want to talk about. We are going to end on something we're calling First Dibs and Best Bets.
Yes.
This RIP by Borrow Skip. Because we're going to just always tell you to borrow it. Like, let's just be honest.
I have a master's degree in telling you how to borrow books, okay?
So that's what we're going to say. So we have started a new segment at the end where we're going to do first dibs and best bets. So I'm going to talk about books that are being published way in the future, probably not on those lists that we put out, probably not on your radar, and the only holds on them currently are me. So the first one is called Rouge by Mona Awad. If you know that, if that name sounds familiar, it is because Mona Awad wrote Bunny, which has definitely become a cult classic, a book talk classic for sure. Basically, with that book, I just want to say, if you know, you know. If you know, you know. It is a wild ride, and I loved it. So when she wrote she wrote All's Well in between Bunny and this, so she's written another book. But when I saw this being previewed, I was like, check mark. Do I have the galley already? Do I have the advanced reader copy? Absolutely, I do. I probably will read it. But it is a horror tinted gothic fairy tale that I believe in the Goodreads description said it's Snow White meets Eyes Wide Shut. Sold.
I will not be reading
sold,
that book.
Sold. 10 out of 10. So
you will not
clearly
see my
I'm very
name on this
excited
list.
about this book. But if you are a fan of Bunny, if you're a fan of weird books, if you're a fan of gothic fairy tales, I think there's some real takedowns about health, beauty and wellness culture. Get on the list. You can place a hold on our catalog right now. And the other one I want to talk about really quick, the other first dibs, is by a former Avid author and one of my favorites, Lauren Groff, is releasing a book in September. Both of these books come out on September 12th, by the way, called The Vaster Wilds. And this is just another historical fiction book that is similar to The Matrix. Her last book was a historical fiction book, but it's just a novel about a girl alone in the wilderness trying to survive. Will there be some deep, heavy metaphysical realizations or some like weird like things that happen? I'm sure there will be. You better know, I'll find out, because I love Lauren Groff and I also have a place to hold on this book as well. So those are my first dibs.
Well, I'm doing best bets. Very different books than Jess has just recommended to you. What? So the first one is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. And I brought TJ Klune up at the top because I'm also reading his newest book that just dropped, In the Lives of Puppets. And this is going to be true for both my authors. I picked two authors that believe in humanity.
That's such a good way to put it. Yeah.
So, and I really wanted to end the podcast that way. So Under the Whispering Door, it touches on grief. It talks about humanity and the life you live and the life you may get to live after. And it's just so lovely. And again, it made me cry, but in the best ways. All of our book chat librarians have recommended TJ Klune before. It's usually The House in the Cerulean Sea, which is also a lovely, amazing book. But I feel like Under the Whispering Door sometimes gets missed.
It's a solid. My sister just told me she liked it better than The House in the Cerulean. I can believe that. I believe it. Yeah, I agree a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a lovely book.
Yes. So pick that one up. And again, his new one just dropped. So if you love that, pick up In the Lives of Puppets, which I'm currently reading, and it's also fabulous. And the second one I'm going to recommend, a best bet, is The Gunkle by Stephen Raleigh. And it is a book about an uncle who takes on his niece and nephew after a tragic event in their family, and learning how to fully embrace family and life and love, because he's kind of shut himself down for his own traumatic reasons up to this point. I just had so much fun. I love anything too where cute kids come and teach you how to live and find yourself. I love it.
A delightful audiobook. I believe Stephen Raleigh reads it. I believe the author reads it, and it is a lovely audiobook full of like just hilarious pop culture references, and like I think it is another book I believe that will break your heart a little, but it puts it back together 100% for sure. And
then if you decide you like it, he is dropping a new book here on May 30th called The Celebrants, which I am on hold for.
Same.
So, yes. So if you didn't catch all these books that we were talking about, please go to our website. We will have a list of them in the show notes, a link to them, so you can put them on hold right away. Get right behind Jess on some of those first dibs. But yay, I'm so glad you got to hear these books. So
yes, we are really excited to really just celebrate the queer community in Des Moines and in the world. These books are important. These stories are important. People need to see themselves in these stories, and people need to see the humanity of other people in these stories as well.
Yes.
So thanks for hanging out with us today, guys.
We'll see you next month.